What's up everybody? Glad you're back. I've been getting a lot of questions since my how to pitch a tarp video on what size tarp to buy, how to protect yourself from bugs, that sort of thing. So I wanted to put together a resource to answer all of these questions in one place. By the end of this video, you'll know enough to buy your first pieces of ultralight tarp camping gear and start planning your first trips. It was kind of gross out today. Normally I would like to be filming outside. For those of you that came expecting the pretty B-roll and nature shots, unfortunately I'm gonna disappoint you a little bit today. That said, today's video is very, very content heavy. Seriously, it's a ton of information. So get excited. This isn't meant to be an exhaustive resource by any means on all the subtopics that we're gonna cover today. Everything that we're gonna cover today could be its own video or series of videos. So I won't be getting too in the weeds on, the abrasion resistance of different types of fabrics or anything like that. So let's dive in. Today we're gonna cover how to choose a tarp, choosing the miscellaneous items that go along with pitching your tarp. So I'm talking about stakes, poles, and line. Third, we're gonna talk about choosing a ground sheet. Then we're gonna consider rain protection and consider bug protection. The reason that I say consider is you don't necessarily need those things. A lot of people just go and sleep directly under a tarp, and that's totally cool. But again, I did have questions about rain and bug protection. And then finally, we're gonna talk about how to learn some pitches and practice. At the end of each section, I'm gonna offer up some recommendations for gear that I think is a really good buy for people that are just getting started. First up, we're gonna need to pick a tarp. And when it comes to selecting a tarp, there's really three things that you need to consider. First is gonna be the shape, second is gonna be the size, and third, we're gonna need to talk about the materials. As far as shapes go, tarps come in two different flavors. You have your flat tarp, which has straight sides. It's generally the most versatile because you can set it up in a variety of conditions, but it also requires the most head scratching as you're trying to set it up in the woods, just because there's so many options. It also requires more precise stake placement to get the most top pitch. The second kind of tarp that we're gonna talk about is what we'll call pre-shaped tarps. So this can include anything that has curved edges, anything that comes to a taper, or more extreme designs like poncho tarps. These generally have one pitch that's optimal, so there's a little bit less guesswork in the field, and also they tend to be a little bit more storm worthy just because the curved edges allow for more even tension across the whole structure. In terms of size, you're really looking at anything from 5x7 to 10x9. Larger is obviously going to leave a little bit more room for error, and it's going to be best for people that are just getting started, whereas smaller footprints offer less coverage, but it's generally easier to find a place to pitch them. Also, smaller is obviously lighter, but generally the differences are pretty minimal. Finally, in terms of materials, you have three different options generally to choose from. You have coated nylon or polyester. This is going to be the cheapest, heaviest, and bulkiest option. Up next, we have sil poly or sil nylon. This is going to be mid-priced, much lighter than the coated materials, and it's also going to be highly compressible in your pack. Third, you have Dyneema composite fabrics or DCF. These are generally the most expensive. They're very light, but they don't compress very well and they take up a lot of space in your pack. My recommendation for someone that's just getting started would be to get a sil poly or a sil nylon tarp that's between 8x9 and 9x10. I definitely recommend checking out Simply Light Designs if you're gonna go ahead and order a tarp. I don't have an affiliate relationship with them or anything like that. I've just found that Jared is a really awesome guy to work with and he's been super helpful with me over the years. They have a ton of different fabrics that you can choose from, so you can definitely get the color that you want. There's also a bunch of different weights, and if you have any questions, he's super responsive by email. An honorable mention here would be the Equinox Egret. It's incredibly cheap and incredibly durable. I have one, my friend that I hike with, Craig, he has one as well, and we've used them for years. They're super cheap, you can find them on Amazon. I think they're like $70 or something like that, and they work really, really well. My only complaint would be that they hold a bit more water than I would like, but it's not the end of the world, especially if you're just starting out. Up next, we're gonna need line, stakes, and poles. So in terms of line, you're just gonna be looking for something that is low stretch, grippy, relatively thin. So for me personally, I like anything from 1.7 millimeters to 2 millimeters. Also, you wanna make sure that it's relatively stiff because it makes tying your knots way easier. If you plan on using trees instead of trekking poles, you'll also want to carry a little bit of additional line as well, maybe 50 foot if you're going to do a standing ridge line, or a few 2 to 3 foot lengths if you just want to attach them onto the lines that are already on your tarp. In terms of stakes, you have 3 separate options. The first is going to be Y stakes. These are going to offer the most hold. They're also going to be the heaviest, but they're the best for staking out the portions of your tarp that are under the most load. Second, you have nail stakes, which are a little bit lighter and medium hold. And then finally, you have shepherd hooks. These are going to offer the least hold, but they are super light, and they're really best for anywhere that isn't under a lot of tension. So maybe like a panel tie out or something like that. My recommendations here are going to be at least 6 MSR ground hogs for the main tie outs on your tarp, at least 2 titanium shepherd hooks. I use Vargos for the panel tie outs on your tarp. I'm going to cautiously recommend Z-Pack's line. The reason that I say cautiously is I just ordered some for my tarp. Currently, I've only used it on my tents, so I don't know for certain how it's gonna work on the tarp, but after playing with it a bit, I'm very confident that it's gonna be awesome. But again, up until I use it, I say cautiously. And then also, I use Z-Pack's trekking poles. Really, it's up to you what you wanna use, but I prefer something that's carbon fiber and has flip locks. Up next, let's talk ground sheets. So with ground sheets, it really just comes down to your choice of materials, and you have a few different options. The first is gonna be polycro. This is gonna be the cheapest, the lightest, but also the least durable of the options that we're gonna talk about. I have never had particularly good luck with it. I tend to shred it pretty much immediately. I don't know, maybe I'm just hard on gear because you hear about people that hike the whole PCT or the whole AT with the same piece. That was just never the case for me. So not necessarily what I would recommend, but it is an option. Up next, you have DCF, which is a little bit lighter, a little bit more durable, and way more expensive. Given the price point, I don't necessarily think that it's the best choice for a ground sheet, just because the whole point of a ground sheet is to beat the shit out of it. So I would rather just use something less expensive. And then finally, you have Tyvek. Tyvek is gonna be a little bit heavier. It's ultra durable, and it also isn't particularly slippery, unlike the polycro. My recommendation would be to start with a piece of Tyvek, cut it roughly the size of your sleeping pad plus a foot on all sides, then throw it in the washer, let it air dry. It's gonna shrink about 5%, and then if you need to, you can cut off any other additional pieces if you think it's too big. But that's where I would definitely start out at. If you want to shave off weight later, you can totally get a piece of polycro, but starting it with Tyvek, you know that you're going to have something that's super durable and you don't have to worry about popping your pad. Up next, we'll talk about rain protection. So disclaimer here, the most important thing as far as rain goes is site selection and making sure that you have a good pitch. That said, you do have a couple of options for additional rain protection on top of that. So first up is gonna be a bathtub floor, which is pretty much just what it sounds like. It's a floor that you put underneath your tarp that has raised sides that keeps splashing off and also keeps any rising water from getting on your sleeping bag. And then the second option is a bivy sack, which is what it sounds like. It's a sack that you put your sleeping bag or your quilt inside of that prevents from splashes all the way around. It's usually breathable on the top, so it just prevents against splashback there. And then waterproof on the bottom, so again, it prevents against any rising water. It also helps to keep drafts out of your sleep system and help you sleep just a little bit warmer. With bivy sacks in particular, you can run into some issues with condensation, especially in particularly humid environments. Here in the Pacific Northwest, I've definitely had some condensation issues with mine, but I want to test out a few different models just to see if I can make it work, because I think that especially in inclement weather, the concept of the bivy sack keeping me warmer and keeping the drafts off and that kind of thing is super promising. But more on that after I have a chance to test them out. Both of these options are going to be available with either DCF or Sil Nylon or Sil Poly floors. Sil is generally heavier, more compact, and more slippery as a floor material. Anecdotally, Sil Poly should be a little bit more durable than DCF, but I haven't had great luck with it. I had a Sil Poly bivy that I popped a hole in on the first night. I had a ground sheet underneath it. I didn't do anything crazy, just got caught on a root or something like that. So overall, I don't have a ton of long-term confidence in Sil Poly as a floor material, but again, I've heard of other people having great success with it. The other option, like I had mentioned, is DCF, which is super light. It's much more bulky, but it's also less slippery than the other options. My recommendation here would be the Mountain Laurel Designs DCF bathtub floor. I've had great success with it, and I found that the DCF keeps me from sliding around all over the place. I really hate with Sil Poly or Sil Nylon floors how you tend to slip around. Now, you can take care of some of that by painting a little bit of silicone sealant on the bottom of the floor material. That said, I just really don't like the idea of painting silicone on a new piece of gear, so I'd prefer just to use DCF, even though it's a little bit less durable. I'm still using my ground sheet, so I'm not super worried about it getting a hole in it. Whatever you end up going with, I'd recommend that you get something that has rigid sides that will stand on its own, rather than something that you need to put lines out to the tarp to keep it up. I just find that it's way less fiddly, and you're not gonna have to worry about tripping over lines in the middle of the night if you have to get up to go to the bathroom. Up next, let's talk bug protection. So you have two options here. The first option is going to be a bug net. This is going to be a bit heavier than the other option, significantly less expensive, and it's also modular. Whereas the other option that we're going to talk about is going to be a bug bivy. Similar to the bivy sack that we would use for rain, this is fully enclosed, except instead of having a breathable layer on the top to keep rain splashes off, it's just bug netting to keep the bugs away. So it's a floor and then bug netting sewn all the way around, and you zip yourself in and out of it. I have one from Bora Gear that I absolutely love. Once I got it, it was a total game changer. That said, it is again a bit more expensive than a pyramid net. My recommendation for starting out though would be to go with the bug net. The reason being is I think that when you're first getting started, modularity is better than specificity. By that I mean, if you just want to use the bug net, you can take that with you. If you just want to use the bathtub floor, you can take that, or you can combine both if you expect lots of rain and lots of bugs. The bug bivy is definitely lighter and it does the job of both, but the only real problem with that is that at that point you're committing to staying inside of that bug netting when you're under your tarp. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it does take away just a little bit from that experience of being under a tarp when you have absolutely nothing around you other than the ground. And then finally, our sixth step here is practice, practice, practice. I'm gonna cheat a little bit and I'm gonna link to my how to set up a tarp video up here. In there, I go through how to select a site, what knots you're gonna need, and a couple of different shelter configurations. Give that a watch and then go ahead and practice in your backyard so that you start getting comfortable with how to set up a tarp. After that, my final recommendation would just be that when you start planning out your first trip, just make sure that it's something relatively low stakes. You know, don't plan a 3-week trip your first time using a tarp, or don't plan to camp on the top of a mountain in the middle of a snowstorm. Again, go for something that's a little bit lower stakes where if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. Other than that, hope you enjoyed. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll see you soon.